Welcome to the SEI podcast series, a production of Carnegie Mellon University Software Engineering Institute. The SEI is a federally funded research and development center sponsored by the U.S. Department of Defense. Today's podcast will be available on the SEI website at www.sei.cmu.edu/podcast. My name is Suzanne Miller. I'm a principal researcher here at the SEI in the Agile in Government program. I'm very pleased this morning to introduce you to my colleagues and good friends, Mike Phillips, Harry Levinson, who work with me in the Client Technical Solutions Division of the Software Solutions Directorate. So, gentlemen, before we get into talking about sustainment and product lines, give me a little bit about what brought you to the SEI, what kind of work excites you about being at the SEI.
Okay.
We'll start with Harry.
There we go.
I'm Harry Levinson, and I spent about 25 years in the commercial industry. A lot of it was banking, data communications, but it was exciting to come to the SEI to work on very large projects. And right now, I've been here 13 years. I have a portfolio of different command and control type systems. A lot of them are finishing up development, trying to figure out how to go into sustainment. Some of them are in their second and third generation of, we could call it modernization.
Mm-hmm. And so one thing I want to bring up, both of you have worked in research areas, but our focus in CTSD is actually to help government clients use some of the technologies that we've either promulgated or invented here at the SEI to deal with things like these large projects.
That's correct.
And so we're not really going to be talking about the sort of really esoteric sort of research that sometimes goes on here. We're really talking about applying those concepts in a real environment.
I think that's a good way to think about it. I call it field research or applied research,
right.
Partly because often the groups that we're working with are willing to be leading edge and trying out things that have been thought through but haven't really been deployed that many ways. Mm-hmm. And every time you have a new deployment, it's a little different or a lot different than the one
Sure.
before.
And give us a little bit about your background, Mike.
Okay, yeah. So I'm Mike Phillips, and my heritage, Harry mentioned 25 years in commercial. I had 26 years in the Air Force associated with flying and then with acquisition. And so it's the acquisition piece that kind of plays mm-hmm. more, although one of the things we were doing in the Air Force at the time that I reached the latter part of my career there was total quality management. Mm-hmm. That led me to interest in process improvement. And so process improvement was what brought me to the SEI. Things like the CMMI effort was part of what I did, mm-hmm. but the intersection that I was associated with at the SEI was bringing together software engineering and systems engineering.
Yes.
And one of the themes of today is this intersection of ideas and why that's really important, because we find that most of our clients don't have a single issue. They have something that it's the intersection of several different problem right. sets, and how much of our research from the past can be used in different ways and unique ways for each customer is one of the values, I think, of conversations like this.
So let's talk about the intersection of the two things that we've brought together here. One of them is product line practices, mm-hmm. which is an older technology, the right. SEI, that's been around for at least 15, possibly 20 years now.
Right.
And then software sustainment. Mm-hmm. And talk for a minute about what's different when we say software sustainment. We use that very specific term as opposed to maintenance or operations. What is it that's different about software sustainment from the overall maintenance cycle of a large hardware system?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, because in fact what is evident in the laws that are currently there associated with sustainment are all built on that structure, that is, how do we sustain hardware, which typically means bring it back in after it's gone through some bruising and fix it. Sure. And that often means put a new, exactly same part back
right,
in,
right.
or shine it up and fix corrosion and things like that is part of the sustainment end of the life cycle. Software is totally different, and it isn't appreciated for its difference. Software continues to evolve, and it's
Right.
going to evolve across the whole life cycle. That will happen whether you intend it or not. So how you take care of that kind of difference makes software sustainment often very unique from hardware sustainment. A term that we've started to use because we think it helps people think differently is that it's part of continuous engineering. And maintenance often and engineering are often not thought of as being in the same bin.
Right.
But-
Engineering is the beginning of the development.
Right.
Not at the end of the development.
Right.
Is one of the things
Right.
that is a mental model that's common.
But often in our sustainment communities, they have that this is about fixing things, and it's about sustaining in a similar mode. So breaking that old mental model of just fixing a bug or something like that to you're evolving it, and you are often modernizing it in some significant way is
So-
very different.
Defense Science Board just is finishing up a project looking at software acquisition issues. And the early brief from that report highlights software sustainment as one of the big issues.
Yes.
And one of the things that they said in that report is we need to stop, and it goes back to your point about engineering, we need to stop separating development from sustainment in software. It is exactly
Absolutely.
that evolution that you're talking about,
Right.
and not something that we need to think about as we're done with development and now we just have to correct defects.
Yes.
It's modernization, it's evolution, it's taking account of different contexts that we
Right.
might use something, different environments it might get subjected to. We've got all the security stuff that
Right.
affects us in ways that we didn't think about 20 years ago. So lots and lots of issues make this a continual effort.
bet.
So how does the SEI's work in product lines contribute to thinking differently and to doing a different, taking a different approach to software sustainment?
Actually, there's probably two different ways to think about it. Product lines give you an asset library. They have a lot of opportunity to deal with the variation of different products. So as things change, they're designed to be able to maybe swap out different components to have different functionality. The other challenge that we're finding with product lines is that it extends the life of the software base. That as each of the different systems are developed out of this product line, there's many more systems that are out there that have different configurations, different environments. As you say, the adaptions that the software needs to make to be useful out
Right.
there increases. And so there's this continual churn of changes to the software that are necessary to keep the product line viable.
And that essentially makes, one way I think about it is you've got this very rich test environment for this core set of assets. And then, and as you evolve, you're making mindful decisions. One of the things I always took away from the product line practice work is mindful decisions about variation. Where do we allow for variation? Where do we want to minimize variation? And how do we want to accommodate variation is one of the things that the product line practices work gave us as some strategies for dealing with that.
Right.
Right, but in addition, you have the challenge that if one of the products identifies a defect that affects other
Right.
products, how do you bring that back in to the common baseline and share that either fix or improvement across the product line?
And it's not just how, but also when.
It's how and when.
Right.
Testing becomes a key factor here in terms of long-term planning.
Right. So things like automated test environments where we can do regression testing all the time and make it easier to do things like that.
Right.
Product line practices fits into that because I can build a suite of tests that are with known variations. I build a new test when I have a new variation, but I also can run against all the variations that are known.
It becomes a necessary component
Right.
for a successful
Yeah.
product line, for sure.
Yeah.
Yes.
So what's some of the work that you've done with clients in this area where you've seen opportunities for this, or you've seen some, either the challenges or successes of trying to marry up those two concepts?
Keep going. Well, okay. So, in the one that was the basis for our article that that led to this this podcast was a particular company came up with a concept, a way to operate a particular capability for, in fact, for the Navy first. Okay, was where they got their start.
Sure.
Now it has evolved and is going to other services as well. So that's one of the challenges that we have in the DoD environment is, gee, how do I treat this when I'm going across various lines, okay? And in sustainment, that has its own set of challenges when you do that. But what's so delightful is to watch how this core capability, as Harry said, can continue to evolve, and that we think of that, somebody used a term that I love, and that's the trunk of the tree is the product line. The branches then are the specific differences that are needed to provide the particular functionality for the particular system that grows off of that root core. And the one that we've been focusing on, it's about 70% or so is in the trunk.
Right.
Now, what is cool about that when we move towards sustainment is there's also laws that say the government has to be able to, no matter what happens to the contractor, has to be able to maintain the capability.
Right.
Now, in software, that means continue to evolve that capability as well, because often the sorts of changes that are required are what the user sees. It's out at the end of the branch where the user is saying, hey, I need it to look this way on my equipment so that I can do the job that this particular system is being asked to provide.
So the product line gives us that stability.
Right.
But it also gives us a place where everyone can bring their issues and they can be adjudicated in a way that allows the entire community to evolve. So that to me has been one of the underutilized aspects of product lines. In the past, product lines were used a lot for particular organizations, in the commercial space for competitive advantage. This is really looking at how do I build a community that is all stakeholders in evolution of this product, but recognizing we allow the recognition of the variation. We're not trying to standardize on a single product because we know how that works. Everybody's got a different idea about what it should look like, and we've never had success that I'm aware of in government of having all the services, work on a single product for very long before you start seeing but I need this. Navy, for example, can only do things to evolve when they come back from deployment, when they're in the dock, especially when there's hardware, software swap outs.
You bet.
Air Force and Army have a different cadence, so you've got all those kinds of things that play into this space.
Well, one of the things that is worthy of mention here is how much more cost effective, and that's a big word in the military environment, is how do I make this long-term sustainment as low in cost as it can be. And typically we say that once we're in sustainment is where we spend something like 70% of the actual dollars are spent in the sustainment phase. So what do we want to do? Well, we want to make sure that core capability is preserved in the most cost-effective way. And a product line, in this particular case that we're describing here, means that a given correction is being applied to multiple systems. By doing that, in this particular case where there's two services sharing the responsibility, they split the cost. So already there are savings, and our product line experts have said, once you get past two systems, Two is kind of like break even, because it
Right,
does
right.
cost more to worry about two systems at the same time. That is, there is a factor there. But once you've passed, two is effective, and three is even, you start really getting the benefit.
Right, right.
In the particular system that we're looking at, there are approximately six elements, 6 times that portions of that product line have been used to support, sometimes by a prime contractor, other times the contractor who came up with this idea is a sub to another contractor for the particular system that this is getting put into. So it's all benefiting that bigger picture.
So what are some of the challenges of bringing product line thinking into this arena where you've got different contractors, different
Right.
government agencies,
Right.
all members of this community that are trying to evolve this system?
Yep.
What are some of the challenges that you have to overcome so that that actually will work?
I just want to expand on a couple of your thoughts there, in the sense that, and related to your question, is that when the product line, what we've seen in a couple of cases, the product line's developed by the contractor, and in order to meet some of the laws, the government becomes more involved as the product goes into operation and sustainment. The government has this challenge, I believe, that not to break the product line.
Right.
A lot of the natural ways that government spending is set up is to have individual programs, and when you start to group these product line systems together, it makes it very. It's unnatural for a government organization to be able to respond in a product line approach. And Mike's been exploring this concept of partnerships between the government and contractors, PPPs, right? Public-private partnerships. So I'll let you expand on that a little bit.
Yeah, I think that that intersection again is very common from my experience in the military. Was I focused on my program, and the program that was sitting just down the hall from me had his own problems, and we weren't trying to find ways to do things that particularly cooperated. And one of the beauties of the one that that was the basis for this is the 3 programs that are within one service have all said, we have a common problem, and a common solution can be created in a sustainment environment where we all operate from the same government location, okay, and that we share the same prime contractor.
Okay.
Both of those are important, or else it becomes very difficult. As you start multiplying the number of intersecting pieces, it just gets harder and harder
And
to
intersecting stakeholders.
Intersecting
so this is a case
stakeholders.
where more is
Exactly
not
right.
always merrier.
That's right. That's
Okay,
right.
that's interesting to note.
So, so that's one of the benefits that's come about as, and typically public-private partnerships are built up of one prime contractor and one organic capability teaming together.
Right.
So if you tried to increase the number that had to play nice together, it doesn't matter whether it's 2 contractors or 2 organic capabilities. There's just more stress on it because there's different cultures at each site.
Sure.
That just happens.
Sure.
Okay.
So where do you think this is going? What's the future of this for product lines and sustainment? Is this a solution for sort of more than just the one case? Do you see potential for this outside of very particular domains, or is some of the things we do really are to solve a big but sort of singular problem?
Right.
Where do you think this fits?
One thing that's going through my head right now is there's another way of looking at this challenge that the government's tried, and to some success in certain situations. It's open systems. Open systems has been called OSA. MOSA, I think, is the most
Modular
recent
Open Systems
modular
Architecture.
open system architecture is the more recent one. But the government has to, in terms of trying to solve some of the problems, the government takes a little bit more control of the architecture and sort of defining the modules to enable multiple contractors to play in this type of system.
Right.
And I think there's different economic models that could probably be set up to enable multiple solutions, multiple systems to take advantage of multiple contractors and come together with a common set of software and enable this variation. So we talk about product lines, but I think there's other solutions that
they
we've
could work
tried
together,
over the years,
right?
and they can work together. So
A modular open systems architecture could be the base for that trunk,
that's correct,
right?
Yes.
Where we if we're intentional about that design,
Right.
before we get to sustainment, right? Then, I mean, and I didn't ask you this question, but I'm assuming that the time for deciding that you're going to have a product line approach is not typically when you're already in sustainment. It's one, where you're, so this is a case where it's already in sustainment, because that seems like that's a harder.
No, the other way around.
Oh, okay.
You've already done, the contractor has to be the source, I would say. I'm not aware of any that have ever been actually spun up by the government alone to be a product line.
Yes, I understood it correctly.
Partly because there's not a value to the government of having a product line, per se.
Of owning the product line.
Right. Now, intriguingly, if you get into sustainment and then the contractor says, I'm done, I want to move on to something else, there may be a new world that says, no, we already have these three working pretty well together. Let's maintain that product line as a government entity.
Owned.
It could happen. To date, we haven't seen. We've seen a couple of, I'm told, by the product line teams, that there have been a couple of attempts to do that, but government isn't the place that this happens most frequently. It's
not
done,
a natural fit.
Correct. It's not a natural fit.
So you start thinking about a product line, the contractor thinks about it as part of development, as part of a long-term strategy. And so the modular open systems also are something that comes in early, typically, in terms of looking at how the system's going to evolve. So you could see those kinds of things. That could be a future sort of research area, is how do those two things fit together, or not fit together. There could be things that we don't understand yet that make them not compatible. That happens too, right?
Right.
A thread that's related but isn't exactly in the same category is this notion of the importance of the architecture for moving into sustainment and into sustainment that includes modernization. Those threads, as we've looked at our various quality attributes, thus far we haven't captured a quality attribute called sustainability. And perhaps we should, because it's built upon a few different things than modifiability per se. It's close, but nevertheless, there might be a reason to think about that differently so that it's easier. We say that now the lifetime of some of these systems is going to be very long.
It's decades.
But the software isn't going to last that long. So to the extent that we can make the architecture support the evolution in an effective way, and product lines is simply one of the ways that can give benefit to both sides.
So if you were talking to a program manager, you met at a symposium, and they asked you the question, how do I improve my sustainment efforts? I've got a program in sustainment, and we're long past the point of it being designed as a product line. What are some other kinds of advice that you would give them to help them in thinking about their software sustainment?
One of the very difficult challenges, as we talked about at the beginning, was what is software sustainment, and the concept that software is always changing is very difficult for people to accept. And a sustainment operation has to think of software as being soft, as being malleable,
yeah.
right? As it's going to change, and we have to define our processes and implement our processes to enable the software to change. One of the concepts that I love, but it's really hard for people to accept is, welcome changing environments in an agile world is the way they talk about it. But if you set up your processes appropriately, you can accept finding those latent defects and blending those with new updates to make the users happy.
Right.
Yep.
And I mean, the truth is, I think your point of accept it, accept that the software is never done,
Right.
is probably one of the messages I would give to somebody is if you think you're done, you're fooling yourself, because the world's going to change, the technology is going to change, the people and their skill sets are going to change.
Right.
So all of those affect the software that's running whatever system it is that you're dealing with, and so until we decide to actually retire or replace that system, you've got to have resources that are tuned to taking care of that, and that's really where that cost comes
Exactly right.
into play. Well, I want to thank both of you for joining me today and talking about this. It's a subject we talk about in the hall, so it's good to get a chance to bring some of this out to the rest of the community.
Yep.
Yes.
And I think the focusing the SEI's focus on sustainment as an area that needs more attention, I think, is very appropriate, and it's reinforced, as I said, by that Defense Science Board report that's coming out. So we're in the right space for helping people, so that's a good thing.
Bet.
Right.
So thank you for talking about this work today, and
Thank you,
I want
Suzanne.
to point people to insights.sei.cmu.edu, which is where blog posts related to this are going to be found.
Right.
And you can look for Sustainment, or you can also look for Mike Phillips as an author, and either way you'll be able to find what's up there.
Find some of these.
And we will provide links to some of the resources that we've mentioned in terms of the blog and such in the podcast and the transcript, so people will be able to get to things that way. This podcast is available in 3 places. As I mentioned earlier, on the SEI website itself at www.sei.cmu.edu/podcast. It's available on Carnegie Mellon University's iTunes U site, and it's available on the YouTube channel for the SEI. We have a YouTube channel.
Wow.
So, yeah. As always, if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to contact us at info@sei.cmu.edu. Thank you.